Good afternoon, nutmeggers. My name is Selena Rifkin, and this is Make Connecticut Healthy Again. Little bit about me to start. I have a master's in nutrition and over 25 years of experience in finding and eating real non-processed food. But even though I have a degree and wrote a thesis, I don't expect you to just take my word for anything. I will always put sources in the show notes, and I urge you to do your own research. So one of the things I'm really excited about with MAHA is that RFK Jr. is committed to regenerative agriculture. He just promised 700 million towards this, and it's honestly long overdue. So I want to talk about what regenerative agriculture is because most people aren't particularly familiar with it. Regenerative agriculture is a way to produce food that increases healthy soil and environmental health instead of depleting it. Most of our modern farming methods are not building up soil. Regenerative agriculture comes in a few different flavors depending on what's being grown and who discovered the principles being used. You might hear references to permaculture, biodynamic farming, polyculture, and holistic grassland management. So why would Health and Human Services care about agriculture? Because we can't grow healthy food without healthy soil. And that's what regenerative agriculture is all about. Soil is a lot more than just dirt. Like our gut, it has an entire microbiome that includes bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, algae, and other interesting critters. All of these contribute to healthy plant growth in different ways. So the best way to build healthy soil is with grazing herds of things like bison and cows and stuff like that. When Europeans first came to the US, the Great Plains averaged a soil depth of around 14 to 16 inches. That did vary a lot depending on where you were. Great Plains are a big place. But in some places, the topsoil was literally 10 feet deep. But we've been losing that topsoil because of our farming practices. And that 14 to 16 inches is down to 6 to 10 inches. So why did the Great Plains have this much fertility? It was a natural pattern. And what would happen is that the grazers were, and of course, bison, and there were some other critters out there too, but bison were the big ones that moved in herds, and they would move in tight patterns. When you look at a field full of cows and the cows are spread out all over the landscape, that's not really how grazers move in the wild. They move together because there's things trying to eat them, usually wolves. But in the case of the bison on the Great Plains, they were also being hunted by Native Americans, and mostly on horseback by the time the Europeans got here. So what would happen is they would be very closely clumped together, and they would all move together in a herd, and they would maybe take one bite of grass, and then they would be pooping. They would all be pooping together. And because it's not natural for animals to hang around in their own excrement, they would move on as a group. And so what would happen is that they would be tromping all over the grass, and they tromp the manure into the grass. They would leave the hoof prints would leave little divots in the soil, and that would collect rainwater. So instead of just running off, the water would actually sink in. And that was very healthy. The other thing that happens is that when an animal takes one bite, then a little bit of root drops off the bottom, and that breaks down and becomes soil. So what happens if the animals are spread out all over the landscape is that the cows get to eat, well, kind of whatever they want, and they'll overeat the things they really like, and they'll ignore the kind of deep-rooted, perhaps maybe not so tasty plants, and then you end up with a very unbalanced grassland. So this tight grouping this is what's natural. And then they would, after the bison would go through, various birds would come in afterwards, and they would peck all of the poop apart, which is where all of the parasites that grazers tend to pick up literally from eating grass. They would go and they'd peck all of the parasites, the worms and stuff that would be in the poop. And in the process of picking it apart, they would spread it all out. So this was the natural pattern, and it built incredibly healthy grassland. And all of this living matter contributed to the soil microbes as well. So plants and soil microbes have a very complex relationship. In order for plants to get the right nutrients out of the soil, they literally extrude things out of their roots that will attract part of that microbiome that has that particular element available. A given plant, and this is anywhere in your garden, this is in your garden, will literally trade up to 40% of its carbon sugars with microbes. It's like a little deal that they have so that the microbes provide them with the minerals they need to grow. Another interesting thing that interacts with plants is the mycorrhizae, which is fungal networks. And the fungi literally pierce the roots of the plants. And this connects entire colonies of different plants and literally lets the plants communicate and even cooperate, which I think is really cool because I'm a gardener. And so I love the idea of having fungi working with my plants. So once farmers came along, and please don't think I'm just picking on American farmers because this is true everywhere. Um, Plows come in and rip up all those deep-rooted plants, and then they're replaced with shallow-rooted annual plants. The major problem with this is that because there's no longer the natural divots in the soil created by hooves, and because those plants are very shallow, any water that sinks in is only sinking down a little bit into the surface, as opposed to potentially many feet. Some of the plants in my garden have roots that are this long. And if a plant has roots that long, that's how far the water is going into the soil. But even worse is the spraying of herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides, and those slowly will kill all of the soil microbes. It'll kill, especially pesticides, which will literally kill the small insects that live in the soil, and earthworms and all the other good things that we know are good in the garden. And so that makes it harder for the plants to grow. And that matters because without soil, the soil microbiome, the plants they're not as nutrient dense as they might be. There's numerous studies, and they're mostly done in Europe, of course, that have shown that the amount of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients is higher in organically produced fruits and vegetables. Now, organic has its own issues. In this country, it's very easy for it to have been hijacked. I know that there's things that they can now spray on organic that really shouldn't be there. And so I find that incredibly frustrating. I was really happy when they came up with the organic label originally. Now I'm a little more skeptical, but I'm still preferring that over more standard production. I am careful about what I'm doing, and there are some fruits and vegetables that you really do want organic and some that don't, and I'll go through that in a later episode. But there are some things that it's really less of a big deal if it's sprayed because it has if a fruit or vegetable has a very thick rind, the spraying is less likely to get inside the fruit and be a problem for you. So I try and be strategic about that because you can't always get fruits and vegetables that you want at the right time. So that's a whole other conversation, but worth looking at. So in terms of growing plants, only about 10% of the land on the planet is really suitable for growing crops. So what do you do with the rest? Well, that's going to be grazers. And there's an awful lot of land on the planet that is perfectly suitable for cows, sheep, goats, or buffalo, for example. Grazers will build the topsoil if it's done correctly. And you don't even need whole packs of predators that chase the herds of buffalo on the Great Plains. This is really great for the planet. And the purpose is food production. So how does regenerative farming compare to conventional methods? So let's look at some numbers. Commercial agriculture in California, and California is incredibly productive. Um, they also spray like crazy. Commercial agriculture in California routinely produces 1.5 to 2.5 pounds of food per square foot per year. And it's like this is an average across a wide variety of crops. Humans need to eat about 2 pounds of mixed food a day if they're active. That's around 750 pounds a year. Um, if you have a polyculture, and by polyculture, I mean a farm that raises both plant and animal foods, the yield for that is quite a bit higher. You can get from 3 to 10 pounds of food per square foot in most climates. And that's because the a polyculture allows the farmer to have built-in fertilizer because fertilizer is going to come from your grazers. It's going to allow for healthier soil in general, and it's and then you can also you can grow hay, especially if you're in a northern climate, you have to grow some kind of food for your grazers to eat during the winter because the forage isn't going to be enough, so you have to grow some hay. So it allows for a lot of interaction, and the soil becomes healthier because of that interaction. So I want to tell you about a little bit about some of the different producers. Joel Salatin, he runs a biodynamic farm in Virginia. He's come up with some of these methods himself. His father came up with some of them, but he mostly, in order to figure out what is important and how he wants to layer his food inputs, he observes. He watches what the cows are doing. He watches what the chickens are doing. He even has a whole system for managing his pigs during the winter, which is highly entertaining. Um, so what he does is he's using the same space that for each input is to make sure that he's producing as much food as possible. For example, after when he's running cattle, the way he does this, and this is the way most biodynamic farmers are doing this now, is that you keep your cattle very close together in a tight group, and you do this with generally with some electric fence. Now, the cattle really don't mind this once they get used to it, because these are grazers and they are evolved to live in very close proximity. So if you go by a field and you see a bunch of cows that are all grouped together, don't panic. This is perfectly okay, and they are happy cows. So the cows are kept in one close grouping in a field, and so they go over the ground and they eat their one bite of grass and they poop all over the place and they tromp on it. And then the farmer comes in, and it's like sometimes when the grass is growing fast, they'll move them twice a day, but typically it's once a day. And then they make another paddock that's right next to this one that's the right size, and they open the door, and the cows are like, "Ooh, new grass!" And in they go. It's very exciting for them. And they might let a couple days go by, and then you send chickens in to do what the birds would have done in nature. And the chickens spread out the manure and they eat the parasites, which keeps the fields very healthy for the cows. And so that means that the chickens are then very healthy because they're eating what's natural for chickens, because chickens are not herbivores. They are omnivores. They want to eat bugs. Um, chickens will eat all kinds of weird stuff. So yeah, they're not I'm told they're not fond of slugs, but other than that, they'll eat like even meat scraps and stuff. So Joel Salatin is highly productive in the way he has his farm, and I'm going to give you some numbers. On his little farm, he produces 30,000 dozen eggs, 10,000 broilers, 800 stewing hens, 25,000 pounds of beef, 25,000 pounds of pork, 1,000 turkeys, and the man even produces rabbits. It's an incredibly productive system. And he's been doing this for, oh, a very long time. And you can look him up. So his name is Joel Salatin. He sometimes goes by the lunatic farmer, but he is probably the biggest advocate for biodynamic farming and regenerative agriculture in the United States. So if you look him up, He's not hard to find. The next guy I want to talk about is Alan Savory. Alan Savory is an ecologist from Southern Africa. And what he discovered was that dry and abused grasslands could become healthy and green again when they were consistently and well and grazed consistently and in a well-timed fashion by large animals. This was very surprising for him because he came in as an ecologist, and at the time, the the given knowledge of the moment was that what you were supposed to do with dry grasslands was leave them alone, and nature would take care of it. And so people started keeping large animals off of these grasslands in Africa. Now, the same thing happened in the United States. This was, they would keep animals off these areas. And instead of healing, they just got drier and deader and nothing would live there. So Alan Savory, he came across somebody who was doing it differently. And what he found is that if you ran large animals through an area that had been very degraded, sometimes you might have to start with putting down some hay for them to eat, but they would poop on it, they would tromp on it, and then what would happen is that the rain would come and the rain would sink in instead of running off because the rain had just been running off. Large animals create divots in the ground. That lets what rainwater soak in. So well-managed grasslands can sequester much more carbon than forest and reduce or eliminate erosion, which is another way that land gets destroyed. And we shouldn't think that the common knowledge has been that grazers are destructive. And no, if they are managed correctly, they are incredibly productive and healing for the land. And in the links, there's going to be a couple of environmental organizations that have pictures of degraded land versus what happens after the grazers come through. And for me, it's very moving because I have been an environmentalist from the time I was a small child. And so to be able to see that this land can be healed is it's amazing to me. This even reduces fire danger. I mean, we think of all the fires in California, and weirdly enough, one of the best ways to reduce fire is send the goats in to eat down the brush. Goats like brush. It's cheap, it's easy, and you end up with happy goats. How cool is that? So that's a rough outline of regenerative farming. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. And so one of the things I want to say is in Connecticut, we're losing family farms. And it almost got a lot worse because we had a housing bill that just passed in the late fall in an emergency session. And because of this bill, Connecticut farmers faced taxes that were going to double or triple what they were paying, and no farmer can afford that. The governor canceled it with an executive order, but that kind of makes you wonder if he read the bill itself before signing it this time, because this is the second pass on this particular bill, and he actually vetoed it the first time. So all of that's a little sketchy. But we need our farmers in Connecticut. And no matter what methods they're using, whatever methods they're using, go patronize your farmers in Connecticut. The last episode, I talked about raw milk, so that's certainly available here. But I'm going to start taking looking at some local farms and seeing if there's some that are really outstanding and share them with you if I come across them. Currently, I'm shopping at Stone Garden Farm Store in Shelton Center, and I will recommend them. They do pasture beef, and I get chicken necks and livers for my cats. Do you have a farm store in Connecticut you like? And if you do, drop it in the comments so other people can see it. So it's up to us to take responsibility for our health and create the demand for real food that supports local farms and rural communities. Your health matters. You are needed. Your families need you. Your communities need you. Go make the world a better place. God bless America. God bless Connecticut. I'm Selena Rifkin, and I will see you soon.